What are we actually supposed to do with a jazz transcription? Do we just learn to play it note by note and so we can play along with our favorite recording? Or could it be the key to unlocking our understanding of the jazz language? I want to take a look at a classic solo from Vince Guaraldi's soundtrack to A Charlie Brown Christmas, and I'll show you what he does to make it really swing. When I was just a kid taking piano lessons at my neighborhood music store, my teacher and I worked through this version of O Tannenbaum from Vince Guaraldi's classic Charlie Brown Christmas album. In the video I made last week, I shared how my teacher had me buy this book. This is a book that is used as decoration on so many pianos this time of year. And in that video, I shared how grateful I was to have learned all kinds of new jazzy chord voicings and movements from this book. But what I didn't tell you last week was that there was one particular thing about this experience that frustrated the heck out of me. I remember sitting with the sheet music, listening to this music and following along. And I did this over and over, really studying the nuance and phrasing of each line. The song starts off in 3/4 in kind of a rubato ballad style. As we traditionally know it. But then again on the next time, Vince changes this all up. He switches the meter to 4/4 and he plays it again, but this time with a swing feel. But this is where things started to fall apart for me. See, by the time you get to the end of the second time through this melody, we're only 1 minute and 6 seconds into the recording. The tune keeps going for 4 more minutes, but the sheet music just says, repeat for all solos. I wanted to keep playing along with Vince. The solo section was my favorite part. Now, I was still pretty young at this time. I think I was like 12 years old, but I was old enough to know that this was an improvised jazz solo. But even so, I wanted to play that solo note for note off the record so badly. So I took out a book of blank manuscript paper and I sat down to figure out what these notes were. And I got nowhere. The notes go by so fast and the rhythms are so complex that my 12-year-old ears just couldn't figure it out. I kept just poking at notes on the piano, hoping they were right. And as that didn't work, I got more and more frustrated. So that Wednesday after school, I took this manuscript paper with me to my piano lessons and I asked my teacher if she could help me figure out the notes. But she wasn't a jazz player and she didn't know how to do that. Now, when school was out for the winter break, sometimes I would go to work with my dad downtown, and after that, we could go to the big public library. I remember looking through the racks and racks of sheet music books, but all I found were 4 copies of this same book that I already had. I felt defeated. I'm 41 years old now, and looking back, that was 29 years ago? Wow. Every year at Christmas, I guess for 29 years, we set this book out on the piano as decoration. And I'm reminded that this stupid sheet music book doesn't have the full song in it. And each year I tell myself, one of these days, I'm going to figure it out. But it hit me harder than usual this year. My nieces are getting older and they're starting to play the piano. And what if they pick up this book someday and they want to learn to play the solo just like I did? I'm in my pursuit of trying to be the coolest uncle of all time. And so I want them to have these notes. And so if there's ever a time for me to do this transcription, it's now. Now, 29 years later, I'm quite a bit more experienced with transcribing. In fact, I publish a new transcription every week for free on my website. You can sign up to receive those at jazzlibrary.com, and I will send you a new one every Wednesday morning. Anyway, I have a bit of a process that I use to figure these transcriptions out consistently. The first step is always to figure out the rhythm. I sit down with my recording and a blank piece of manuscript paper. I completely ignore all the notes and the chords. I'm just trying to sketch out the rhythms. There's no magic trick here. I sit and trap the beat in my left hand, I sing the rhythm out loud, and I write it down with my right hand. That's it. You do that measure by measure, phrase by phrase, until you get through the whole thing. While I go through this process, I can't help but compare what I'm hearing in Vince's solo with the types of lines that I play myself. And these observations are the key to finding ways to improve our own solos. Take a look at this rhythm. I'm in the final time through the changes, and the opening phrase is all eighth notes. The second phrase also starts on eighth notes, but then it continues down in triplets. And the third phrase starts on 16th notes, but then it mixes in eighth notes and triplets with it. And so here's our first observation. We want to play contrasting rhythmic subdivisions. I've got a private student who plays really melodically, but his lines tend to be rhythmically monotonous. It's just phrase after phrase of eighth notes. But if you look again at Vince's solo, basically every phrase has some combination of eighth notes, triplets, and 16th notes. The next thing I notice is how much variety there is in terms of where in the measure the lines start. Look again at these same measures. The first phrase starts here on the offbeat before beat 3. Then the next one right on beat 3. Then the next one on the offbeat of 4. Then the offbeat of 2. And keep looking. Every phrase starts in a different place rhythmically than the phrase that came before it. My teacher still harps on me for this. In fact, I just texted him to tell him about this observation, and he called me a slow learner. I guess I do have a bit of a bad habit of starting lines too much on the end of one. Also, while we're looking at this, notice how every phrase crosses over the bar line. This is a mistake every new player makes. The bar lines are not barriers. We don't need a new phrase every time the chord changes. Actually, it's much more desirable to play phrases like this that fly over top of the bar line. Also, if you kind of zoom out and look at this, you can see another form of contrast. Some sections of the page are blacker, right? They're more dense with notes. They have these flurry of fast-moving scales. And then other areas are more open. Take a close look at this section. See how Vince plays this kind of fast, flurry busyness of notes. It's exciting, it's chaotic, it's complex. But then look at what happens immediately after. If it were fast and crazy the whole time, it would be overwhelming. You would have never had time to process what happened. But Vince doesn't let that happen. Every time he plays a flurry of notes like this, he immediately follows it up with something simple. Now that we've got the rhythm fully mapped out, from start to finish, the next step is going to be to work on the notes. Our rhythms here are going to act as placeholders, and we're going to go step by step, note by note, replacing each placeholder with the correct pitch. Now, before we start just poking at notes and hoping that we're right, let's take a step to try and set ourselves up to be successful. And to do that, I like to take this rhythmic sketch and write out chord symbols over top of them. Pretty often, we can just use the chords right off the lead sheet, as typically we're soloing over the same set of changes from the melody. With the chords mapped out over top of the rhythms, we have a harmonic framework that we can use to help guide us to find the right notes. And so the next step is to find the first note and the last note of each phrase. These two notes are the easiest to hear, and since we already know what the rhythm is going to be, it's as easy as just replacing our placeholders with the right notes. To get the rest of the notes that are in between these points is really just a matter of ear training. If I had to give some tips, broadly speaking, I guess, I'm listening to hear what flavor of scale is being used in that line. And that will help me narrow things down a bit to where I can get the notes. I can hear this phrase and just think to myself, oh, that sounds like a blues. And so then I start using notes from one of the blues scales. The next phrase sounds like it starts on a C, it then comes down chromatically. I just know the sound of a chromatic scale. And then from there, it sounds F major-y to me. It's got a little bit of a blues hint at the end because I hear that blue note, that flat 3. And if you keep going, the next phrase sounds like harmonic minor to me. And indeed, over G minor, this is a harmonic minor scale. The combination of that E flat and that F sharp is just unmistakable to me as harmonic minor. Again, I wish I had a cheat code for you, but the reality is you just have to know what major sounds like, what harmonic minor sounds like, what the blues sounds like. And then you can trust your ears and your experience to help you find those notes. This particular solo isn't actually that complex in this regard. It really only uses those 3 scales. If I zoom out here and show you the whole thing, the blue sections are F major, the green sections are G harmonic minor, and the yellow sections are blues. Now, once you've gone through all this work, and it is hard work, it took me close to 20 hours to do this, we do have one important step left. We have got to play along. When I was in music school, I had to take a conducting class. And in that class, they taught us this idea of splitting the metronome. And the whole point of this was to be able to tap a beat so perfectly in time with the metronome that the metronome disappears. That if you did it successfully, you can't even hear that metronome click anymore because all you hear is your own tapping. When we play our solo along with the recording, we want something similar to happen. We want Vince Guaraldi to disappear. We want to perfectly mimic his style, his phrasing, his timing, his articulations, so that when we play on top of it, we don't even hear him at all. You will learn so much by doing this. There are times when Vince pulls back and plays behind the beat, but at other times he plays perfectly in the pocket. You will notice how he articulates the end of his phrases, how he pivots in the middle of his phrases, how he articulates repeated notes. Music notation can be complex, but usually these important nuances are lost if you're just looking at the notation. But when you try to play along, trying to make Vince disappear, you have to become aware of those things and change your playing to mimic and match. Now, all of this is hard work, but it's super rewarding, and I think it's a lot of fun. But if you want to bypass all of that work and just download the transcription to play for yourself, there's a link down in the description. You can have it for free, but you have to promise me something. If you go to a young friend's house and you see this book on their piano as decoration, print off a copy and give it to them.